Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. March 2009. 4 British soldiers approached the main gate of the largest American military installation in the country, a sprawling fortress of blast walls, watchtowers, and razor wire stretching across the Afghan plain. They arrived without authorization codes, without prior coordination, and according to the guards manning the entrance, without any visible concern about either of those facts. The Americans turned them away. Correct procedure. By the book. 40 minutes later, a roving security patrol found the same 4 men walking calmly through the interior of the base, not near the fence line, not at a secondary entrance. 800 meters inside the perimeter, moving toward the Special Operations Compound, as if they belonged there. The patrol challenged them with weapons raised. One of the British soldiers, steady and unhurried, rifle slung loose at his side, suggested, with what the incident report would later describe as infuriating politeness, that perhaps the Americans might want to review their protocols. That was the moment Colonel David Hutchinson, base commander of Bagram Airfield, understood he had a problem that more fencing was not going to solve. The base should have been impenetrable. Bagram housed over 30,000 personnel behind multiple layers of perimeter fencing. Motion sensors covered every approach. Observation towers rose at regular intervals along the wire, manned around the clock by guards with unobstructed sight lines across open ground. Roving patrols moved through the interior on unpredictable schedules. Surveillance cameras tracked every entry point. The security team leader, a staff sergeant who had helped design several of the protocols himself, who had run the drills and walked every meter of that perimeter, insisted it was physically impossible to cross that wire undetected. He had staked his professional reputation on that assessment. The British soldiers waited patiently while someone from British command was contacted. They did not appear concerned. The security review that followed found nothing. No cut fencing, no triggered sensors, no gap in camera coverage, no guard who could account for 4 men passing their position. The soldiers had simply materialized inside one of the most fortified installations in the world. Security had not been breached. It had been made irrelevant. What made it worse was that this wasn't the first time. Hutchinson pulled 18 months of records. 3 other major U.S. bases across Afghanistan showed the same pattern. British SAS operators were discovered inside secure perimeters, always without authorization, always without any detectable means of entry, and always with the same unsettling calm when confronted. Each incident had been logged and investigated. Each investigation reached the same conclusion. The security systems had functioned correctly, and yet the intrusions kept happening. The Americans assumed the British were running some kind of unauthorized stress test. They were probing perimeters, mapping weaknesses, and gathering intelligence on the gap between how American bases were designed to function and how they actually did. Organized, deliberate, probably sanctioned somewhere up the chain. It was a reasonable assumption. It was completely wrong. The truth, when it finally emerged after months of coordination between U.S. Central Command and British Special Forces headquarters, was both simpler and more unsettling than anyone on the American side had expected. SAS were not testing American security. They just did not think it applied to them. In British Special Forces culture, moving through denied areas, reaching an objective regardless of what physical or procedural obstacles stood in the way, was not a specialized skill reserved for enemy territory. It was baseline competence, maintained continuously, because the moment an operator stopped treating every environment as a potential operational space, he began losing the edge that kept him alive and the ones that mattered. American bases were not secure facilities to SAS, they were training grounds. Low-stakes environments where skills could be exercised without real consequences. And from the British perspective, the question was not how they had gotten in. It was why the Americans had made it so easy. 2 militaries, 1 war, and a fundamental disagreement about what the word barrier actually meant, and whether it applied equally to everyone. The friction had not started at Bagram in 2009. It had been accumulating since the opening weeks of the campaign. Kandahar Airfield, January 2002. Operation Enduring Freedom was barely 3 months old, the base still raw and expanding across the southern Afghan desert. A U.S. Army logistics officer conducting a routine check at 2 in the morning found 4 British soldiers inside a restricted ammunition storage area, moving methodically through crates of American weapons and ordnance with the deliberate attention of men who knew exactly what they were looking at. When challenged, they produced SAS credentials and offered a technically plausible explanation. They said they were familiarizing themselves with American weapons in case they encountered captured U.S. equipment in the field. Taliban forces did occasionally seize American arms. The logic held on the surface. The problems were in the details. The storage area required clearances that took weeks to process. The soldiers had passed through 2 security checkpoints whose guards insisted nobody had come through their position. When pressed directly on how they had gained access, the British response was that they had found an opening, a phrase that explained nothing and seemed carefully constructed to avoid explaining anything. A formal conversation between liaison officers followed. The British apologized. They expressed what appeared to be genuine confusion about why this was being treated as a serious matter. They gave assurances it would not happen again. 3 weeks later, different SAS operators were found inside a classified intelligence facility at Bagram, reading mission reports restricted to U.S. personnel only. Same pattern. Credible reason for being there. No valid authorization, no detectable entry method, and an explanation that amounted to 3 words: "We found a way." The apologies were sincere. The behavior continued anyway. By 2003, U.S.-based commanders had stopped treating these incidents as misunderstandings. They implemented countermeasures, reinforced identification checks at every entry point, restricted movement corridors for all foreign military personnel, additional patrols in sensitive areas, expanded camera coverage across every perimeter approach. The SAS adapted to each new layer without visible difficulty and continued to reach the areas they wanted to reach. Every escalation produced a quiet, immediate adjustment in method, not resistance, not confrontation, just adaptation, as if the countermeasures were interesting problems rather than actual barriers. By 2004, the situation had shifted from frustrating to genuinely alarming. It was no longer just about unauthorized movement. It was about what that movement revealed. If Allied operators, working the same theater, nominally on the same side, could penetrate U.S.-based security with this consistency and ease, then U.S.-based security was not what U.S. commanders believed it to be. And if it was not what they believed against forces who were not trying to cause harm, what was it against someone who was? That question never received a clean answer. What emerged through months of back-channel coordination following the 2009 Bagram incident was a conclusion that satisfied neither side. The Americans wanted the British to follow procedures. The British wanted the Americans to understand that operators who stopped practicing infiltration in permissive environments would eventually lose that capability in denied ones, and that losing it could cost lives when it mattered. Both positions were reasonable. Neither was compatible with the other. The SAS kept moving. The Americans kept filing reports. The incident reports were classified. The liaison meetings produced frameworks and formal assurances on both sides. And the SAS kept moving. Somewhere in the gap between 2 Allied militaries, between a force that saw rules as the foundation of security and a force that saw rules as one variable among many, the same question kept surfacing without resolution. If you can walk through a wall, is the wall really there?